To watch all of my exclusive content not featured here on my channel, log on to my website at imjustheretomake-you-think.com/films. Remember hearing the phrase, "Truth is stranger than fiction"? That is because fiction can also be interpreted as general information that is commonly agreed upon as the norm, whereas truth stands opposite of the devil's advocate, provoking physical, mental, and spiritual independency amongst its seekers. The regions of information pertaining to the topics of Black history, U.S. history, world history, and especially African American studies lacks honesty, accuracy, and transparency. An example of this is how some people may believe that they are a descendant of an African slave, but haven't followed up with research to validate that theory's accuracy, honesty, and transparency for themselves. This means that some people are either willing or have inadvertently allowed strangers to gain influential control over their lifestyles, and that alone causes systematic behavioral destruction. To learn more about this topic, I highly recommend watching my latest documentary that I'll link above, where I shared detailed information about social engineering experiments conducted upon humans in order to cultivate scientific methods of influencing and manipulating their behaviors. Remember that knowledge is power, so the more people that knows, the better. Over the years of presenting this information to the public, my newer subscribers would tend to ask similar questions concerning what our ancestors looked like before and after colonial times. And of course, I get excited to answer back, which is the main reason why I created this video. Now, I get this question a lot due to how compulsory education indoctrinates young students with conceptualism and conceptual arts for the purpose of American history and all of its affiliates. So most people are unfamiliar with seeing the American Negro as being the original American Indian. Now, the American Indian, or the Niji, were historically known for harvesting crops and distributing resources along the most conveniently located channels of the Nile, which is also known as the Mississippi River, which was used for trading goods domestically and non-familial. One of the main resources that was initially cultivated by the Indians was tobacco. Before and after colonial times, the indigenous American Indian men especially were known for using smoking pipes, traditionally called various names in multiple different indigenous languages throughout the Americas, for ceremonial purposes or for just casually smoking. If a pipe was not available, some copper-colored Indians would use tobacco leaves to roll tobacco and/or other materials inside of the leaf, then light up the leaf with fire on one end of the leaf while smoking from the other. During the 18th and 19th centuries, tobacco shops throughout America and many other parts of the world would showcase statues of American Indians inside their stores to pay homage to the original producers of tobacco and other smoking products. What's very essential to note here are the details of these statues or artifacts, and how during the time of their creation, the images of the American Indians are depicted as people who carried so-called Negroid facial features, with skin variations resembling only shades of the color brown. For example, there's an antique shop located in Baltimore, Maryland called Dubé's Art and Antiques, whereas a quote, cigar store Indian is being sold for the asking price of $9,500. This carving stands 24 inches tall, and according to its description, This was created in Scotland during the year 1790. Keep that in mind. It reads, quote, "This well-carved cigar store Indian was manufactured for tobacco companies in Scotland as a display item for their products. This particular form is commonly referred to as the Virginia or Black Boy style," end quote. Another example would be this Indian cigar holder that was carved during the mid-1800s and then sold in 2009 at an antique auction for a total of $495. The description reads, quote, "Unusual early figural metal countertop cigarette holder with nicely detailed painted image of wild-looking American Indian," end quote. And just in case you were wondering about early images of the indigenous Niji of the West Indies, here's a pair of vintage tobacco jars that was created in Italy during the 1930s and sold for about $3,000 during an antique auction. The description reads, quote, "A pair of Dutch colonial-style glazed terracotta or pottery tobacco jars decorated with pipe-smoking figures and colorful leaf motifs in the West Indian manner," end quote. Here's another example that I shared with my most loyal supporters a few years ago, where this robbed cigar store Indian statue was sold on eBay for a staggering $1.5 million to someone in the UK.
Thanks for bringing the Indian. Tell me what you know about this.
I brought it in for a friend of mine, and it came down through a different family. It first, the story goes that it was first in a grocery store in Springfield, Kentucky, called McCoy and Shades Grocery.
Okay.
And I guess maybe advertising tobacco.
Okay.
And then years later, it was in the Majestic Theater in Springfield. And,
Springfield, Kentucky.
Springfield, Kentucky. And then the Robertson family was, through marriage, required it through the family. Their grandfather or something, grandmother was married into that McCoy family or something, and it came down through the Robertson family.
Okay.
And it was in the circuit clerk's office for about 35 years. Bubba Robinson was a county clerk.
Okay.
And
sat in his office then.
In his office.
Yeah.
And then after he retired, it went to his residence.
Okay.
And now his son has it. So that's all I know about it.
Okay.
Basically.
Well, you know, it's interesting, and I'm glad you brought it in. This is one of those objects where I might spend a little more time talking about what the object is and what we think it is versus kind of the history of cigar store carved Indians.
Right, right.
Interesting, right? It would be, if it were a period thing, be scarce in this small size. Most were almost life size when they were carved and used, as you kind of indicated, by vendors, by trade to draw customers, clients inside the doors, left outside for those initial years. We looked at this. There were a number of other appraisers and I that kind of looked at this and spent some time. To be honest, we're a little split on what it really is. I think at the end of the day, it's not as early as some of the earliest of these carved images. And they weren't all Indians. Right, they weren't all Indians, but it's not one of the earliest. But let's talk for a second about what we do see here. Painted surface, carved wood, right? Initially, we weren't kind of sure if it was wood or not.
So it is wood?
We believe that it is wood, not all of it. The feathers up here are a tin, right? They're a painted tin. The body is a carved wood. The base right here is this wrapped piece of, it's a thin strip of lead that's wrapped around, and then it's a plaster that's poured underneath, okay, on a wood base, all right? Top to bottom, there's a painted surface over all of it. I love the painted surface here on the base. It has a kind of a finish and a grizzled nature about the varnish today that you can't really fake, right? I'm going to use that word for a second. The rest of the paint here is 3 or 4 layers deep. How do we know it's wood if it's covered by paint? You have a couple age cracks here where we can get a loop, a magnifying glass, into the crack, and we can kind of see into the wood grain. And we can see multiple layers of paint, so it has kind of a paint history. That's not unusual for these things, particularly if they were outside, because the weather would have worn down the paint. This was probably not outside. The small size would have sat on a countertop on the inside. I don't, again, think by characteristic or by some of the other things that we see about the paint that it is one of the earlier executions which would have made it the late 19th century. Right? Somewhere between 1870 and 1890. I think what you probably have here is something that might have been made in this area, but might be from the 30s to the 50s. Now, I know you told me a story about it being known since the 30s, but I think it's probably made right around the turn of the 20th century.
Okay.
All right. And it may have been outside for a little bit.
Sure.
The layers of the paint history are kind of hard to tell again because they're all built up. What does your friend think about the value? Do they know?
Well, he had it appraised years ago.
Okay.
And they
probably should have started and told me that part up front.
They wouldn't put a value on it. They wouldn't put a value on it.
Didn't put a value on it.
No.
That's interesting. Did they say why they wouldn't put a value on it back then?
They said they didn't have anything to compare it to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
If I'm trying to date the age of this, right, I like the fact that there are the tin feathers. That, to me, I think puts it in a certain time period. Again, probably somewhere between 1930 and 1950. If I'm giving it a value, because I think that there are some questions about the origin and the age, I'm going to probably give it admittedly maybe a conservative value of something in the $1,500 to $2,500 range.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
For what I think it is, because there are some questions about it. But it's an amazing execution. Right? Certainly in that style of these earlier Indians.
She belonged to my maternal grandparents, and they purchased her in about 1960. And I think that she was originally part of the Abby Aldrich Rockefeller collection, and they sold her at a sale at B. Altman department store in New York. And my grandparents, who lived up around the St. Lawrence River, I don't know how they heard about this particular sale, but they went to New York and brought her back.
Thousands of these images and artifacts depicting the original American Indians are still in existence right now in more ways than just one, exposing the discrepancies in the imagery of the Niji later utilized by the likes of Hollywood and other correlating entities. Now, in conclusion, regardless of how bad some of you may feel as if your ancestors came off sailboats from West Africa during the slave trade era, people are now actually researching their families' records and discovering just how much they were lied to when it comes to who they truly are. So when they lie and say that tracing your family's genealogical records stops somewhere around the 1800s, just ask yourself, then where are the records of slave trading between 1619 and the 1800s? If they can feed you that info, then they also have your family's records prior to the 1800s. If history was written by the victors, then they wouldn't have a reason to lie about history, right? But once you begin to question everything, you will soon realize why it is called his story and not our story, revealing that someone or somebody's had a manipulative agenda behind what you were told. I'm just here to make you think.